We know also from research that when there's less cortisol in the body, you're likely to be less re-traumatized when remembering something.
This is Gene Montrose telling welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast recorded live today from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 482, originally aired October 7th, 2020. Hi everyone, I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today, we're going to continue to move you from the basic recipe to mastering the art of delivery. You'll learn how to find root cause faster, clear issues quicker, and have longer lasting results with your tapping. Today, we're going to do that by having a conversation about your brain, your nervous system, your organs, and tapping and how all of those things fit together. Before we do that, just two quick things. First of all, if you haven't done so already, we have a free 10-part guide that will help you to eliminate self-sabotage. All you need to do is go to tappingqa.com, click on the big blue button. If you happen to be listening to this in the website, up in the right-hand corner at the top of the column, you'll see a big blue button. Click on it, and you will get that guide absolutely free. Second, I wanted to send a big shout out to all of the supporters of the Tapping Q&A podcast. For those of you who are supporters, make sure you check your inbox over the course of the last week. I sent you 2 free gifts. These are new products that I am selling, but because you support the podcast, you get them absolutely free. If you too would like to support the podcast so we can continue to do such great work and receive a number of amazing bonuses that are advertised and unadvertised, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/support. Today, I have a conversation with my friend Jen Cincurak, and it's one of those conversations where we're talking about a lot of things all at once. But as we go through the conversation, you see how all of these integral parts fit together to make it easier for us to tap. We are complicated creatures, us as humans. You know, we're mind, body, spirit. There's biochemistry, there are organs, there are memories, there's all of the stuff that we're carrying around with us, culturally, the stories that have been told to us. And all of those things mix together into a soup, which determine how we respond in the moment. And the way that we create transformation inside of our system is in direct response to how we function as an organism. The beautiful thing about tapping is it's not just about pushing new ideas into our brain, but we can actually see changes in the body. We can see cortisol levels drop. We can recognize the fact that we are leaving fight, flight, or freeze and returning to growth and restore when we are tapping. So over the course of this conversation, Jen and I talk about that really complicated system that is our body and how tapping integrates with that. And I think this is useful for 2 reasons. Number one, if you understand the concepts that we are sharing in this conversation, just quite simply, you're going to get more out of your tapping because you understand exactly what we are going after when we're trying to create transformation. The second thing that this sort of information does is it continues to build our knowledge about being able to describe what is actually going on biochemically inside of our body. At one point, Jen refers to our system as this giant pharmacy of chemicals, which I think is pretty amazing because that's what's happening is our body produces all sorts of hormones and biochemicals to help regulate our emotion and deal with what's going on. And when we understand that more clearly, it's much more easier for us to share the power of tapping with those in our lives because we're able to describe it in a clearer, more scientific way. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Jen. Initially, what got you interested in thinking about kind of biological function and the way our system works in regards to tapping and the responses that we get from tapping?
You know, this is actually what sort of pulls me back into tapping because I had met tapping before, used it a little bit in my practice with my patients, and then I moved cities, moved towns, changed jobs, etc. I was working with a different clientele and population, and I forgot about it. But then I had my twins. And while I was on maternity leave for my twins and not sleeping, one of my patients who I'd referred her to someone else, and he was saying, oh, that anxiety, yeah, just do some tapping to rewire your brain. And I was like, what? Wait a minute, there's that tapping again. And I really respected this practitioner. And if he was saying it's going to help you change your neural patterns, I was going to pay attention to that. So that's what really kind of pulls me back into tapping. And that's when I was like, that's it, Jean, that's when I found you. I bought the 2 manuals, started reading through them, and I just consumed everything I could on EFT because clearly I wasn't leaving the house for a while. I had a 3-year-old and twin infants.
Right. So as you've been doing that, kind of then like it's nice to say it rewires our neurology, and that that's a really nice shorthand when we're talking with someone and dealing with a client, because we're not going to get into the nuts and bolts. This is an opportunity for us to really kind of drill down. So what are you seeing as like the mechanisms and the entry point where we're seeing transformation with tapping happening? And if there's a couple of them, maybe we can just kind of march through them one at a time and see what that experience is.
Okay. So yeah, I could answer you directly, but I'm wondering can I tell you about, there's 3 different areas of brain biology or brain and body biology that really excite me around this. And I know your users are quite experienced in tapping. A lot of them are. And maybe this will I'll say it slightly differently than they've heard.
No. I love the background. I love the context. As much information as you want to share, that's perfect. Go for it.
Okay, awesome. So the first thing I want to say, and this is another one of the things that really pulled me into the idea of the way that we hold trauma or stress in the body, is the vagus nerve. Because I had to study this, in my background as a naturopath, very clearly remember coloring this in anatomy class, coloring book. But then when I understood it, Stephen Porges's work, for instance, in the polyvagal theory, when I understood it this way, it makes everything so much more exciting. So we have a bunch of nerves that come from the brainstem, but this one nerve called the vagus nerve, it's the longest nerve in the body. It's like the grand mama nerve. And there are a few branches of it that come into the face and help us to recognize when people are talking to us what their facial expression means. And it also helps us to understand the tone of voice and the pitch and tone of voice. So, like everyone who talks to a baby, suddenly they're talking like this. Exactly. And that's studied everywhere around the world. Doesn't matter what language you are. So that helps us to understand. Part of that nerve does. The prosody of the voice, the up and down of the pitch, and the way that your face looks when you're talking. But then also this long nerve, it travels down your neck into your chest, and it innervates is the word, but supplies nervous system energy to your lungs and your heart. So, beats your heart, helps your lungs breathe. But then it passes through your diaphragm and it supplies everything to your internal organs. So as a naturopath, that really excited me. For years, I'd be sitting with someone with IBS or a gut issue, and they'd be like, well, it's so weird. I've been really nervous ever since I had this condition. So I would explain, well, that's because you have this entire nervous system around your gut, and talk to them about the vagus nerve. So then this really excited me because I was getting into EFT, and I was always the most excited about people who had mental emotional management issues. So this really excited me as far as what we do with EFT, in that most of what happens, most of the communication of this nerve actually comes from the body to the brain, not from the brain to the body, which is kind of contrary to what we normally think. We think our brain controls everything, like I'm going to pick up this pen or I'm going to walk over here, and that's voluntary control. But with this nerve, most of it's coming from your organs and from, reading the face and whatnot to your brain, which is super amazing to think about, because that means that the state that your organs are in, or whatever is happening down there when something happens, is in that instant when something stressful or traumatic happens, that's what your body is remembering. So it's kind of like they have their own posture, if you want to call it that. So anytime they're going through something like that, you're going to be getting signals to your brain saying, bah, 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 alert, something's going on. And that's so subtle, right? That's going beyond, that's going on way deeper than the level of conscious awareness. So I love the vagus nerve and could talk about polyvagal stuff all the time. I am no scientist expert. I haven't worked in a lab doing that, but I love it. And then that leads right into the idea of cortisol. So your adrenal glands, the study of when you're a teeny tiny little embryo growing up into a baby inside, called embryology, when you're just like wrapped up like this and you're like little cells, so slowly splitting into what looks like a cute little sea creature. But when you're folded over onto yourself, some of the cells that are in your brain and the nervous system end up staying in that part of the body. So your adrenals are part of that, where the nervous system is lower down. So they're these little pyramid-shaped glands that sit on top of your kidneys. The insides of them release a couple things, but adrenaline and noradrenaline are one of them. And then the outside shell or cortex releases cortisol. And so when we go through a stress, we release, if it's a big stress, release more cortisol. But if it's a small stress, and this is the one that we're all good friends with, where there's just a little drip, there's that deadline coming up or that disappointment or that relationship thing we're worried about. But cortisol, unlike the other ways that our brain can wire around a neurochemical like oxytocin or dopamine or serotonin, it's way stronger. So this is just a survival technique. It was more important for you, for your brain to remember, oh my goodness, when I smelled that smell last time, a tiger attacked, versus, oh, when I smelled that smell last time, my mom gave me a hug, sort of thing, right? So we wire in things way faster with the cortisol. So then I wanted to talk about how that leads into mirror neurons, which was discovered in the mid-90s. Super cool. And with mirror neurons, this is sort of how we're taking on beliefs through our lives. So we're growing up, little Jen, little Jean, whoever you are out there, and we're just sort of soaking in whatever's happening in the culture. And even if we didn't necessarily have a parent saying, you should do this, and it was very voluntary and conscious, we're just sort of seeing what's going on, and then we model it and we mock it and we wire that in just naturally. Especially though, we wire things in where we see someone getting out of pain or when we see a reward at the end of it. And that's when our brain will light up when someone else is doing something else, and we start learning that as well. So then in EFT tapping, in a way, that's kind of what we do all day long as a practitioner, is help other people to, whoa, wait a minute, where did you take that on? That's amazing that you did that at that time, but you don't need that anymore. And slowly work at breaking that down and changing that pathway. That was a mouthful.
That's great. Okay. So inside of that, there's some things that I think for folks who are experienced with tapping are going to tease out really, really quickly. This idea of, changing the story. So with the mirror neurons, we understand how we are writing those stories, and experienced tappers understand how easy it is for us to be able to, like the phrase that I'm always using is, the goal is to get a proportionate, well-informed emotional response. And so the story that we have written is either misinformation, like X happened, therefore Y was the consequence. Therefore, I think every single time X happens, Y happens. So I'm getting the story that's wrong. I see a parent be afraid of a bee. So the story is, when this shows up, that is dangerous. Therefore, I now have the story, when I see B, it is dangerous. Tapping is really, really great in unspooling that. More and more, we're seeing research around the fact that when we start stimulating the tapping points, we can measure cortisol levels dropping. We can see it in saliva. We can see it in the blood. Like that is a mechanism. We don't necessarily know how or why that happens, but we do know it does happen.
I really wanted to say that when I was talking about cortisol, so I'm so glad you brought that up.
So the first one we know from doing something like the movie technique, or taking a limiting belief and change it. Awesome, makes sense. Number two, tapping on it brings cortisol down. So then, with the information about the vagus nerve and how that's informing what is going on, how then, knowing that's the way the system works, why is EFT and tapping useful for dealing with what is coming from there, or the stories that are written from there?
Okay. So let's take, for instance, someone is in a school cafeteria and something tricky is happening, or they're being bullied, or they're seeing bullying, or something happens that they don't deal really awesome with. Let's say at the time they're eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Gotcha.
And let's say they see this quite often. They happen to love peanut butter and jelly, so they have it in their lunch a lot. And then down the road, or maybe not that far down the road even, something happens and they notice, I'm not doing very well with peanuts anymore, and they're developing a bit of an allergy. So this is like the inside information, where it's that posture again, where it's remembering what it was doing.
Gotcha. I see what you're saying. So what it's doing is it's tying two pieces of information together, because we are experiencing them simultaneously, even though those two pieces of information aren't the same thing.
That's right. And when cortisol releases and wires something in our brain, it particularly goes for what was happening, right around that, the moments before, the milliseconds before.
danger always wins. So it's trying to keep us safe from moving forward in that way. And it's interesting where we're kind of doing this thing that we're tied together. One of my favorite things to just say, hey, if you're looking for something interesting to go and tap on, if you're tapping on your own, go to the Billboard Hot 100.
I love that.
The year that you were 13 years old, and just hit play and you'll get all the feels. There's a podcast that I listened to.
You know the one?
There's a podcast called Hit Parade that I listened to.
Yeah.
And Phil Collins' song was part of this thing. And I can even still feel where I was in the neighborhood as I was walking around, and like just in the middle of my chest, the emotions just went on two chords. Like it was just like, oh my gosh, am I in 7th grade again all of a sudden? and so it becomes this really interesting thing for us to, unwind that stuff, because like with the idea of the stories that are written from our mere neurons, it makes sense. It's really easy to go, I was in this circumstance, it felt dangerous, therefore I'm going to unpack and change that. Mm-hmm. It's much harder to recognize the correlation of what was I listening to, what was I eating, what was I smelling, what was going on in my environment, because those get knit into our understanding of the thing that is dangerous, even though it is superfluous information that has nothing to do with it at all.
Absolutely, that's right. I did a trauma training with Peter Levine's somatic experiencing before I refound tapping. And that was one of the super interesting things that I learned, was that all those tiny little nuances, like seeing snow, hearing a dog bark. I love dogs, have dogs in my life. Why am I afraid of a dog barking? Oh, because when that thing happened, there was a dog barking. But just like you said, you would never think to analyze that. You have to go back. And that's what EFT does beautifully, because then when you're telling the story or whatever technique you're using, then you could be like, oh, wait a minute. There was a dog barking, I remember. And the dog wasn't barking to hurt me. The dog was barking because it saw me being harmed and it was alarming people.
Yeah. And so this is the place. So we were talking about this idea of things that are disproportionate. This is the place where we start ending up with information. Tapping is to get rid of disproportionate, misinformed responses. And so this is the case where, like, it's easy to tease apart misinformed when I'm afraid of a mouse, because I can tease apart the fact that it's not actually dangerous. Like, it might be creepy, but there's no danger of this little bitty mouse running across my kitchen because its vision's so bad it can't even see me. Like, I'm just this blob of color that's hovering above it. It's much harder when there's not a logical way to explain the misinformation.
Yeah.
Like, I can explain to you that a mouse is not dangerous. I can explain to you that being in an elevator is not a dangerous thing. But when my system is responding to something I am eating, and all of a sudden I'm having this emotional substance sensitivity response, I don't have the training or the thought to make a cause and effect relationship between the thing that I'm putting in my mouth, where, like a song, I can say, oh, that's such an emotional song. And I can attribute it to the meaning of the song, when in reality, it was the resource state that I was listening to the song originally to. But at least I can kind of make that connection. And so I can see how we can miss this stuff when those things are getting tied together.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's why tapping is so amazing, because then when you're in the middle of a tapping session with someone, A, all these little things come up, but B, because you're decreasing the cortisol by just tapping, like we talked about the research out there, we know also from research that when there's less cortisol in the body, you're likely to be less re-traumatized when remembering something.
So we're getting it kind of coming and going. One is we're able to transform the way that we are responding in the world. And two is when we are responding, we're responding in a smaller way because it's less of a big deal because of the biochemistry of what's going on in the body.
Yeah, exactly. So double whammy.
It's interesting. Like, one of the people oftentimes get really hung up when they're tapping because we say, be specific as possible. And they hear that and think you're saying be specific. And sometimes as specific as possible is I'm sad. And that is all that I have for you, is that I am sad. But as we tap on I am sad, the analogy I'm always using is like fog in the backyard. As the fog burns off, all of a sudden, oh, now there's a tree and there's a shed. Oh, now there is a tree and I know it is a pine tree and the shed has a doorknob on it because
Mhm.
it's coming in clearer. And so as we're tapping, what we're doing is we are getting clarity to the details, and the clarity to the details are the details that are important to what's going on. One of the, as you're talking about this, and I hadn't thought about this in a million years, but in my hypnosis training, when we are revivifying something in the past or replaying something from the past, you're supposed to ask the questions. What do you hear? What do you smell? What is the
Mhm.
temperature in the room? Who is with you? And those aren't questions that are necessarily about the incident that is causing the pain, but we're drawing on those things that you were talking about. And so, I guess what that means, one of the things that means is as we are doing something like the movie technique, or we're just remembering, even without something as specific as the technique, if we are a practitioner working on our own, to start asking those questions that are about the environment that we might not necessarily to think about. Because it's like, if it's an incident where I'm dealing with someone who's angry at me, I might think of what was the look on their face? Were they standing above you? Were they across from you?
Right.
Were they screaming at you? How close to you? Because I'm thinking in terms of the person I'm interacting with, but it's also important and useful for us to start asking about all of the other environmental conditions that are inside of there. Because, I'm sure you've heard this as well. This probably has nothing to do with it, Bob.
It's gold.
Yes, my single favorite phrase as practitioner,
Yes.
and so if we are talking about something that was really scary, and objectively is scary, someone yelling at me, that is scary, and you start giving me details about the music that was playing, the smell that was in the air, the sound, there's a reason that that's still hanging around in the memory. And I would be willing to bet as a client, I'm not going to bring up, boy, it smells like peanut butter unless I'm prompted into that particular thing, because me retelling the story, I'm going to dismiss that as just a detail. Oh, for some reason I remember peanut butter, but it's not important. And so by naming it in this way and making it specific, we can see how useful it is to start unpacking those particular things. Other than what I've just mentioned right there, as practitioner or as an individual who's just tapping,
Yep.
how do we start practically applying some of these thoughts as we sit down to tap, as we're coming up with details and using phrases and stuff like that? What are some of those things that we can do that's more useful?
Well, the first thing is what if you just tap and don't even worry about talking at first? Just mindless tap. I love that. So it takes the pressure off about what am I saying? Am I being specific enough or not? Just tap. And often something will come up out of that. So you decide I'm going to have a tapping hygiene protocol. And just while I'm watching my Netflix for a half hour, whatever, I'm going to finger tap or tap on the points. Just do that and see how your energy or your nervous system is toned and you feel calmer in general, right? Because you're decreasing the cortisol. But I feel like with you, if you start at something that's a little bit general and then just sort of see what comes to mind, that'll help you to get there deeper. And also because, like we said, the cortisol helps you wire in everything to do with that situation, like the dog barking or the peanut butter or whatever. And you see this all the time, I know, because you work with a lot of experienced tappers. They're amazing at noticing that stuff. They'd be like, squirrel. Oh, that squirrel, I know exactly where that's tied to. So if you're not an experienced tapper, it's okay if you seem like, why am I out in outer space when I'm supposed to be talking about this?
Yeah. Well, and what's really funny is you say that experienced tappers notice this thing. This goes exactly back to what you were talking about earlier, where we are built to recognize rewards so we know to do something again. And so when we start noticing that stuff, we're more likely to notice it again. One of the things that I always do that I learned from my hypnosis training is that when I'm tapping with a client and like interrupt themselves with a yawn, I go, ooh, good yawn. I will affirm, I'll give them a cookie and say, that was really great for you to do that particular thing. And so they're more likely to do it. And so if we are and ourselves noticing stuff, it's like, if I notice things, I'm more likely to notice things because I'm constantly getting rewarded by that. But what it also sounds like from a practitioner point of view to go, oh, that's a really, that seems like an unrelated detail. It's a really great thing that you brought that up. Let's follow that down, that we're conditioning them to recognize the fact that, ooh, all the details are important, regardless how ridiculous they might seem in the moment as I intellectually process this.
You just brought up a really great point about the vagus nerve there when you said the thing about yawning, because we all know that in tapping, you have lots of ways of letting go of stress in your body, right? Some people might be feel their stomach gurgling, or like you must get a lot of people with their stomach growling in session,
I get
right?
lots of burping, actually.
And I was going to say gas moving up or down is another big one. Oh my God, that's your vagus nerve, like helping move things along. That's a wonderful. Peristalsis means you're part of, peristalsis is the movement of stuff through your gut, right? That means that you're relaxed. That's rest and digest phase of your automatic nervous system. It's wonderful.
And it's one of those things that, like, like we talk about fight, flight, or freeze, and we know what that experience is like, but part of fight, flight, or freeze is stopping all of the things that are going on in my body that are not valuable to me being safe in this particular moment.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped digesting food because digesting food right now is unuseful because I'm trying to escape the lion. It's the reason why that we're scared crapless. It's literally the system going, I don't have time to digest. Get this out of the way.
I was so scared I peed my pants.
That's right.
There's a reason for that saying.
That's right. That's what's happening is the body's saying, oh, I'm going to do this other thing. So the instant we are yawning, the instant we have burps, we have gurgling, we have all of that stuff, we're getting the consequence of being in grow and restore because we've returned to those regular biological metabolic functions that are not about me escaping in this particular moment.
Yep. That's exactly it. And you said something there I wanted to point out, which is you're talking about being in a situation again. And I wanted to say, think about this as like you're going into the office. Okay, right now we're in coronavirus, so you're seeing people on Zoom, but there's someone that you see them every day, or 5 people that you see every day, and you're like, oh yeah, that person. And the eye roll happens. And there's like an entire inner body position that happens when you see them, right? There's a whole chemical pharmacy going off. So these are the things that you can change your reaction to, because you're probably not noticing, oh, when I see that person, I suddenly don't feel hungry, or I do feel hungry, or all of the millions of things that are happening biologically.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we often do not think of the fact that we can have an habitual response that is emotional. When I see a certain person, or I hear their voice, or anything like that, like it takes a lot of energy for us to think. And so we create habits so we don't have to think. Like, I'm not having to go through this decision tree of process all of this stuff. I literally just I see this, therefore I know to respond in this particular way. And we can create them about locations, about activities, about people, and all of that stuff gets tied together in that really specific way that you're talking about.
Because we're not fighting tigers anymore, we focus all of our cortisol on social situations all the time. So like your reaction to Bob or Jane or whoever, that is what, like, your cortisol is always looking to keep you safe. And it's like, well, duh, we're not living in a forest with the bears anymore. So what do I got to do? Eyes akimbo. Who do I got to see? Who's going to bother me? And it's looking for reasons to be like, oh, I located the danger. Ooh, now I can feel better, because you constantly want to feel better.
And it's interesting as we look at that, like, that sense of feeling connection to others and that sense of rejection goes back to that really, really deep place of 7,000 years ago. If I got pushed out of the tribe, I died.
That's right.
And so when I'm experiencing rejection, biochemically, my body is responding as if, oh, I'm being pushed out of the tribe, therefore death is imminent. Mm-hmm. I was on Monday, I was talking to Brad Yates, and he uses this phrase a lot. It's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the scaredest. And our ancestor, who was better at being afraid, was the one that avoided the big fuzzy creature with the giant teeth. Yep. And they were the one that survived, and they were the one that procreated. And so the next generation had just been trained from the ones that were really good at being scared. And so generation after generation after generation, we just became more and more efficient at being afraid and being able to respond in that way. And we've now gone from a really rough and tumble tribal society to a modern society where there are things that can go wrong, but the danger is really different, and the biology has not caught up to that.
So cortisol basically is the reason why psychology has the negativity bias. exactly what you're saying, because it's the stronger one that'll keep you alive, right? So we have hundreds of thousands of years of, like Brad says, being more scared, but being more scared was being more smart.
Yeah. I mean, and like the example I'm using with my clients all the time is walking up the stairs. So I live in a 6th floor walk up. I have to walk up 75 stairs every single time I walk out the front door. And in the now 7 years that I've lived in New York City, I've tripped exactly 3 times. And I can tell you the detail of all 3 of those trips walking up those stairs. And I walked up and down my stairs multiple times yesterday, and I have exactly 0 recollection of doing either of those things. Because it doesn't serve me in keeping me safe to remember the thing that went well. It was like, oh, that went well, psh, put it away. But I need to make sure I'm on guard for danger. Therefore, I'm going to give this disproportionate weight to the things that went wrong. And again, we get back to this idea of a disproportionate emotional response. It's disproportionate because I'm only remembering the negative data. Like biochemically, my brain is built to remember the negative data, so I stay safe.
So with tapping, we can use one of Peter Levine's favorite tools with somatic experiencing, which is just to acknowledge you did the right thing and acknowledge the power that your brain is wired to do that, and really let yourself feel the empowerment of, oh, I survived that. I didn't fall down the stairs, or I dodged Bob at work today, or whatever the case may be. And then with the tapping, boom, you can start shifting that. Okay, I don't need to dodge Bob anymore. Or like the example you said about someone yelled at me and they were standing like this and they were this far away. Oh, wait a minute. It's okay when someone is standing that far away with a loud voice, those tiny little nuances. That was great for me to be worried about it when I was 10 or 5. But now I'm 40 some. I don't need to worry about that.
Sometimes when we're releasing stuff, we will not heal until we know why. Because there is a part of us that says, if I understand why, then I can prevent it from happening again. So I have clients consciously or subconsciously resisting tapping on an issue because they haven't understood it yet. But like you just said, there are certain things that are never going to happen again. I'm never going to be 7 again in a power dynamic where I do not have the agency that I have as an adult. Now, there are times I don't have agency as an adult, but I'm never going to have that particular, like that circumstance is impossible to recreate. And so as I'm releasing that and I'm transforming that fear, it doesn't matter if I remember those old details, because it's in some capacity an unuseful memory, because it's not something I'm ever going to repeat again. It's like when the iPhone changed its design and they got rid of a little button and they went to a Face ID. 6 days after that happened and I had the new phone, a friend of mine handed me his iPhone 6 and said, "Can you take a video of me?" And it literally took me 30 seconds to remember how to open up the phone and do the old video. And it was a phone I owned a week ago because it was no longer useful information to me. Like literally my brain went, "Oh, you don't use that phone anymore? Great. We can just delete all of those files." And we're carrying these old files from these circumstances we can delete because we're not in that circumstance anymore.
Great example with the iPhone. And what you were saying about the why, I feel like that's why traditional therapy takes a long time, because there's so much thought about why did this happen and really understand it. Let's talk about it from the left and the right. But you have to get into the body. You have to tap into the vagus nerve and get somatic with it and release it, right? Which is, again, tapping, somatic. Wonderful.
Jen, thank you so much for this. Like, as someone who is always in a circumstance where I'm trying to explain stuff for folks to make it more understandable, because it feels a little woo, having this sort of information is really useful. But I think the thing that's more important for those of us who are tapping, when we understand the mechanism that's going on inside, it's easier for us to be more effective with our tapping. So really, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I fully 400% agree.
I hope you found that conversation as useful and as fruitful as I did. There were lots of great little nuggets in there. I was actually very fortunate. This interview happened a couple of months ago, and we've just gotten around to being able to share it because I did a whole bunch of interviews all at once. But it was really fun having this conversation right at the time as I was writing the book, and I was talking about the biochemistry of trauma, and having this conversation inform the things that I was writing. So I found this conversation super useful, and I hope you did as well. If you know someone in your life who could use this particular conversation, please pass it along. I'd really appreciate it. It's the highest compliment that you can pay my work, is to share it with a friend. And if you would like to find out more about Jen and her amazing work that she is creating, and she's created a number of of really awesome stuff alongside our friend Nancy Forrester, who was on the podcast recently. All you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/482 for episode 482. Or if you go to tappingpodcast.com and just search in the archive for 482, you will be able to find Jen, her amazing podcast, and some really interesting things that her and Nancy are doing around consciously applying EFT to create really true, profound transformation. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the podcast. In podcasting parlance, subscribe is always free. You can do it in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music. Anywhere you find audio, you can find the show. Just search Tapping Q&A. The reason why it's important that you subscribe or follow is so that when new episodes come out, you receive notification. So you know and you don't miss the goodness when we are sharing it. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you'd like a topic you'd like us to cover or someone you'd like us to talk to in the future, I love hearing recommendations from listeners just like you. Some of the best shows that we've done over the history of the show and in the last 6 months have come from recommendations from people just like you. I can always be reached at Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com. Or if you're on the website, click on that contact link. Or if you happen to be one of those lucky people who've downloaded the free Tapping Q&A app, if you click contact inside of the app, you can send me a voice memo or an email right inside of the app. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Montrestelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Montrestelli Tapping Q&A. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Montrestelli and Tapping Q&A.